He looked me in the eye and said, "Family helps family." But in that moment, I realized what he really meant was that he could steal my home, my peace, and even my name, and expect me to stay silent. That betrayal cut deeper than anything I had faced before, and it forced me to fight back in ways I never imagined. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I moved to Naples, Florida for the sound of water doing what it does best, coming and going without asking permission. My bayfront villa sits low and wide, lime-washed stucco catching the Gulf light, a dock like a quiet handshake extending into the green-blue shallows. Each dawn, pelicans coast in on fat wings and set down as neatly as bush pilots, their shadows gliding across the ripples and into my kitchen through the glass. It's a small ceremony, but I've learned to treat ceremonies with respect. I'm Thomas Alvarez, Tom to my few remaining friends, Mr. A to anyone who met me through my daughter. 62, retired from nearly 4 decades of building things meant to hold under pressure. Bridges that don't chatter in crosswinds, seawalls that bully storm surge back into line, causeways that keep their dignity when tourists and hurricanes arrive at the same time. I trusted concrete because I could see where it failed and why. People I've discovered crack along stranger seams. When my wife died, the house in Cleveland turned cavernous. Grief stretched the rooms wider than paint could fill. I sold it when the winters began to feel punitive, and I brought the leftovers of a careful life south. Pension, a stack of IRAs, an unused 529 plan that had once been a bright idea, and then a quiet reminder. The proceeds, plus the frugal arithmetic of a man who brings his own lunch, bought the villa. It is not a palace. It is a promise I made to myself that the second half would be quieter. I keep the place as I kept job sites, labeled, timed, logged. Receipts sit in a fireproof safe by month and vendor. The Ring cameras keep better watch than any neighbor, though I still wave to them when I water the bougainvillea. HomeKit hums in the background, doors obeying the schedule I set. It's not paranoia, it's the habit of a man who knows that what you secure, you get to keep, and what you leave to chance becomes someone else's opportunity. Elena used to tease me about that. My daughter with the easy laugh and the stubborn heart. She had her mother's insistence on kindness, which once felt like invincibility and turned out to be a softer metal. Cancer doesn't negotiate, and when it decided the terms, the rest of us went along. 3 years later, her absence still rearranges the furniture when I'm not looking. I find myself saving stories for her and then stacking them in the same place I put unused screws, labeled unnecessary, but too true to throw away. I wake early as a matter of discipline, not insomnia. Coffee at the Long Island, fan ticking above. From the porch, I can see the bay unbuttoning itself at first light, the water line retracting from the mangroves and exposing the pocked mud where fiddler crabs do their absurd parades. I've been learning the names of the breezes, the quick onshore whisper around 10, the lazy drift that makes the flag wrap the pole in a gentle choke at noon. Retiring doesn't extinguish the part of a man that counts. Plans here are straightforward. I meant to swim laps in the tiled pool until my shoulders stopped complaining, to coax a papaya tree into confidence, to turn old cedar into modest furniture at the Marina's woodshop 3 afternoons a week. I meant to fish only enough to stay honest and to talk just enough to remember I still can. Naples is full of people who are fine with fewer words. That suits me. My closest neighbor, Ruth, is 70 and dresses for the sun like it's a lawsuit she intends to win. Wide hat, gloves, long sleeves, a gait that says the world can keep up if it wants. She looks in on me without hovering, the way good neighbors do. "You're the engineer," she told me the first week, peering over my fence at the gutter angles. Good. We need fewer romantics on this street. Her eyes miss nothing, and I appreciate that. Romance, in my experience, is where specifications go to die. There is family of a sort. Derek Cole was Elena's husband, and then her widower and now Lily's husband. He has never called me Dad. Mr. A lives exactly at the distance he prefers, polite, cool, an umbrella term he can hold without being held by. I never asked him to shorten it, names or obligations, when you say them too often. We exist in a truce defined by funerals, holidays, a handful of emergencies, and the practicalities of paperwork. If you ask me whether we like each other, I'd say we understand each other and leave it there. I bought the villa fully aware that the line between privacy and isolation is a thin rope and that I might wobble on it. So I invested in handrails, routines that felt like ribs under the skin of a day, lists for groceries, a calendar that told me where the tides would be when I wanted the dock to float just so. Weekly calls to a friend in Ohio who still inspects highway overpasses and reports with a grim joy that rust never sleeps. When an old life narrows, you find ways to widen the new one without letting it fracture. Sometimes I eat on the screened lanai and pretend the sizzle from a neighbor's grill is waves talking consonants. Sometimes I sit at the edge of the dock and let minnows write their bright signatures in the shadow of my legs. Mostly I let the house teach me how to live inside it. Houses always do. They tell you which doors want to be opened, which blinds resent being pulled, which rooms hold your voice at a pitch you don't love. This house has been patient with me. I have tried to return the favor. A few reminders of my former life travel well. The leather portfolio that once held bridge calculations now holds warranties, HOA bylaws, and contractor's cards in a tidy array. The drafting pencils are down to stubs, but I keep them anyway. Every man has tools he keeps after their job is finished, as if retirement were a clock you could wind backwards if you turned the crown carefully enough. When I open the portfolio, the paper smells faintly of graphite and purpose. Evenings, I switch on the amber pathway lights and sit just inside the sliding doors, where air conditioning and dusk negotiate a treaty. Boats come home single file, their wakes parceling the bay into small temporary countries. I take inventory of the day's small victories, a leaky hose bib tightened, a stiff shoulder coaxed into cooperation, a recipe almost conquered. It is a modest ledger, but it balances. Peace, it turns out, is expensive to acquire and cheap to maintain if you pay attention. I did not come to Florida to be difficult. I came to keep faith with a version of myself I still recognized. A measured man, built for weather, grateful for simple machinery and promises kept. If I sound particular, it's because life taught me that boundaries aren't fences until you close the gate. Out on the bay, a heron stalked the shallows and jabbed once, clean as a signature. I watched the bird swallow, then lift into the last light. The house exhaled around me and the day folded itself shut without incident. Tomorrow, I thought, would be the same. If you're still watching and finding this story engaging, comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Now, let's move on to Chapter 2. Friday began with the easy grammar of Naples. A blue morning, a coffee mug warm enough to be company, the bay rehearsing its steady breath. I had a roofing contractor scheduled to look at the ridge vents before hurricane season. The man texted he'd be 20 minutes late, which in Florida means routine rather than insult. I set a new pot to brew and opened my tablet to check the HOA portal. Street sweeper on the cul-de-sac at noon, a note about palm frond trimming on Monday, nothing that would bend a day out of shape. I was making a list for the hardware store, hose gaskets, LED bulbs, exterior screws, when the iPhone broke into the kitchen like a whistle on a job site. The caller ID said Derek. He almost never called in the morning. We tended to communicate like two ships in fog, a light, a horn, then distance again. I let the ring go once, twice, then answered because habit still mistakes civility for safety. Noise hit first. Wind. A chorus of voices, the thud of bass escaping a car door. Derek's voice rode on top like a man surfing a wake. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask if it was a good time. He announced a plan. "We're coming down to Naples," he said, words bright with momentum. "About 20 minutes out. 12 of us. We'll need towels, food, and the master for Lily's yoga live in the morning." There was a second where my brain searched for a joke. 20 minutes? 12? The master? I pictured pelicans banking lazily over the bay and the absurdity of cramming them into a phone booth. I kept my voice even because engineers are trained to approach weird loads with calm. "This house isn't a resort," I said. "And you haven't asked." He took that like a speed bump, felt, then forgotten. The wind behind him rose and fell as if cheering. "Family helps family," he said. "You've got space. We'll do 3 weeks if the schedule works. Think of it as a long overdue get-together." In the span of 2 sentences, my quiet morning had been converted into an itinerary I hadn't seen and a philosophy I hadn't subscribed to. I looked at the long counter with its neat line of moving boxes still waiting for their turn, the freshly oiled hinges, the sealed deck stain, each part of a life I had been assembling slowly enough to hear it click. The dock flag tugged the pole outside in a small, polite warning. I kept my reply short. "Not today," I said, not uninvited. He laughed, not unkindly, but like a man who assumes gravity knows his name. The call ended in the noisy way it began, a soft pop when the air leaves a room. I let the phone rest face down on the island. It warmed my palm like something slightly alive. I told myself the conversation would evaporate, that people say dramatic things on highways and mean something smaller when the exit ramp lowers the temperature. To steady myself, I did what I know. I checked systems. The HOA app shows gate activity in real time. I thumbed to the log. 4 guest vehicles had just cleared the guardhouse. The entries were stamped with my address, the notation field reading "Guest of Alvarez." I had not placed a call to the gate. I had not placed any calls at all that morning except the one I had just taken. The screen fuzzed for a moment, the way eyes do when the brain is deciding how much trouble to admit. If 12 people were 20 minutes out, 4 vehicles could make sense. It could also be coincidence. A gardener's crew tagged incorrectly, a delivery truck routed to the wrong cul-de-sac. Engineers love alternate hypotheses until they don't. I stepped onto the lanai and looked at the water. The surface wore that pre-noon shine that hides as much as it reveals. Boats at distance become pills you could swallow for quiet. I listened for something I could name: tires on brick, laughter, the mechanical breath of too many coolers opening at once. Naples stayed itself. A breeze came off the bay, patient as a metronome. The oddest part of impending disruption is how gently the world keeps doing its job. A text arrived from Ruth. Neighbors of a certain age prefer voice, but Ruth texts when she wants the record. "He's here," the message read. "The one you call Mr. A's son-in-law. I saw him at the side gate, punching in the lockbox code like he owns it." She followed with a second line before I could respond. "New code, right? From last week?" I hadn't told Derek the new code. I hadn't told anyone, except the pool service, the pest control guy, and the electrician who replaced the panel surge protector on Tuesday. I felt each name slide through my mind like a bead on a string. Trust is a system too. You build it, you test it, and then you find out where someone prefers shortcuts. I called Ruth instead of texting back because some moments deserve breath. She picked up on the second ring, the brim of her hat almost audible. She kept it brief. "You should know," she said. "He had folks with him." I told the guardhouse to note it. "Thank you," I said. "I'll handle it." It was the kind of sentence men in my line use when we mean we have a procedure, even if we don't yet know its steps. Inside, I opened the Lockbox app. The access log displayed 3 entries in the last 10 minutes. Successive attempts, a successful unlock, and a relock. Someone had stood at my side gate and treated my key like a door prize. I changed the code again and revoked all temporary permissions. A small, practical victory felt like a leaf against a windshield. I pictured Lily testing light in the master bedroom, angling the camera toward the waterline, letting the blue do some of the talking for her. I pictured Derek narrating the fridge inventory, declaring the grill situation adequate, assigning people to rooms by seniority of friendship rather than ownership. None of this had happened yet, but the shape of it pressed against the walls like a mark you can already see under the paint. The roofing contractor texted to say he'd arrived at another address first and would push me to Monday if I preferred. I replied yes, not because I wanted to be agreeable, but because a crowded driveway and a ladder truck do not blend. I put the coffee mug in the sink and washed it even though it wasn't dirty enough to deserve it. Hands are grateful for work when a mind is busy with weather. I sat at the desk in my study and laid out my tools like a ritual. HOA portal on one screen, lockbox app on another, ring feeds arranged in a grid that made the house look like a chessboard. The feed showed exactly what surveillance usually shows: stillness, occasional lizard, the bay blinking its big, bright eye. I set the phone beside the keyboard to keep it from ringing loudly and startling me. I wrote down the time, the number of vehicles, the words Derek had used. Documentation tethers fact to memory when adrenaline starts arguing. It occurred to me that none of this was an emergency yet. It was an announcement of intent. In construction, you can tell if a seawall will fail by how the soil behind it slumps after a storm. In families, you can tell a different kind of failure by how people speak when they want something you haven't offered. My house had clicked into place around me since I moved in, each day a notch that felt earned. The thought of 12 bodies and their loud certainty moving through these rooms without invitation worked on me like heat. It slowed my thinking and sharpened it at the same time. A flock of terns turned as one above the bay, shining white, then gray, then white again. I took that as a cue to stand, to breathe, to remind my shoulders that they belonged to me. Whatever came up the street would find a gate that closed, a man who knew where the gate control was, and a record of what happened when. I am not a dramatic person. I prefer bolts torqued to spec and sentences that end where they should. But a boundary is just a theory until someone leans on it. Out on the water, a shrimp boat angled toward the pass as if answering a call. I listened for the sound of unfamiliar tires approaching brick and promised myself I would not mistake noise for permission. They didn't arrive like guests. They arrived like a plan that had been rehearsed without me. 4 vehicles rolled onto the pavers: SUV, sedan, pickup with a cooler strapped like a promise, another SUV with tinted windows that rebuffed the sun. Doors opened in a staccato of thunks and hinges. The first bodies out moved like they already knew where the shade would be. I noticed shoes left untied, beach towels flung over shoulders, a speaker carried like a crown. The smell that came with them was sunscreen over gas and something sugary, the way vacation always tries to launder itself. Derek came up the walk with his look fixed between apology and entitlement, the hinge he likes to lean on when he imagines leverage. He didn't offer a handshake. He clapped my shoulder as if we were midpoint through a conversation I had never started. Lily followed with a ring light in one hand and a water bottle the size of a fire extinguisher in the other. The others radiated openness, the practiced innocence of people who assume walls exist to hold up their stories. I didn't invite anyone inside. I stood on the threshold because thresholds are where rules declare themselves. I kept my voice at room temperature. "This is not happening," I said. "Turn around, find a hotel." They smiled with their eyes the way people do in corporate training videos. One of the men I didn't know peeled away and peered into my study as if square footage were a public good. A young woman lifted her phone and panned the lanai, narrating the light as if it had posed for her. In the corner of my mind, a foreman with a clipboard checked the box next to non-compliance and circled it twice. I did not repeat myself. Repetition is a seduction. It invites argument and converts no one. Instead, I stepped sideways, reached for the side gate's keypad, and killed its code, then thumbed the smart panel to lock the interior doors that mattered. They could have the air, they would not have the rooms. Boundaries are not symbols until they touch something useful. Derek's mouth adjusted to a new tactic. He softened his tone and let a little hurt show around the edges. He described this as a long-planned family visit with friends who were practically family. He said the word master the way some people say sanctuary, as if the room held a sacrament and he was its true believer. He invoked Elena without speaking her name, the echo of her kindness doing work on his behalf. The old me would have swallowed hard and tried to make a compromise in the shape of a chair cushion. The new me remembered the HOA log, the lockbox entries, the sound of Ruth's hat through a phone. I stepped back into my study and opened the laptop. If I was going to be the unreasonable man in someone else's narration, I would at least be an exact one. The HOA portal still showed the guest entries. The lockbox app showed attempts like a Morse code message. 3 tries, 1 unlock. Then a notification popped that didn't belong. "Welcome, Tom. Your new listing is live." A cheerful email from a company I had never used, full of confetti emojis I didn't need to see to feel. The subject line named my street. The body of the message used my name and voice to describe my villa as a coastal oasis available for a 10-night stretch at a rate that would make my HOA president add a second vein to her forehead. My stomach went cold in the efficient way of steel. I clicked the link, and there it was. My dock, my kitchen island, my bedroom photographed at angles that looked like Lily had already been inside with a camera while I slept. The host profile was Tom Alvarez, and the payout account numbers were not mine. This wasn't courtesy fishing for a weekend. This was monetization by impersonation. I took screenshots. I downloaded the listing page as a PDF. I forwarded the email to my attorney's address with a subject line that told her I would be needing a faster Monday. Outside the study, voices rose and fell like surf. Someone laughing, someone dragging a cooler, Lily testing her ring light against the shade. I copied the listing link and pasted it into a message to HOA compliance with a short, unambiguous note. Then I called the guardhouse. "This is Alvarez at Bayview. Mark every entry from the last hour and stand by for law enforcement. No more guests through my gate." I walked back to the threshold and took one long breath to remind my ribs who was in charge of them. "Listen carefully," I said, and kept my tone flat because flat is where facts live. "You are not staying here. If you do not leave in the next 5 minutes, I will make a police report for trespass and impersonation. I will not discuss it again." A pair of sunglasses turned toward me as if I had said something eccentric at a brunch. Derek moved closer, his voice pitched for intimacy. He reminded me of promises I had not made. He implied that Elena would have approved of generosity that benefited him. He used the word owe, not to mean debt, but to mean obligation without end. He tried on the face of a reasonable man dealing with an unreasonable elder, a mask that plays well on camera. I didn't rise to it. I looked past him at the driveway, at the line of vehicles that hummed as if they were listening. I pictured the lockbox log, the HOA entries, the listing pulsing on a website like a beacon for the wrong ships. I thought of enforcement as a tide, slow, steady, indifferent to surface drama. Then I turned, entered the study, and dialed 911. The dispatcher sounded exactly like the person you want on the other end of a bad day. I explained in sentences that would read well later. Uninvited arrival, refusal to leave. Evidence of a short-term rental listing created without my consent, under my name, for this specific address. The phrase paper trail has always comforted me. You can walk back down it in daylight. By the time I ended the call, the room beyond the threshold had changed flavor. The music dropped a notch, the ring light snapped shut, the voices lost their upward tilt. They could smell authority coming even if they called it by other names. I stood where I had started, on the edge between in and out, a patient man with a neat portfolio and the tide behind him. The bay glittered at my shoulder. Somewhere out there, a dolphin surfaced and took a breath that sounded like agreement. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I waited for the siren and the paperwork that would turn theory into line item. Sometimes you don't win by making a point. Sometimes you win by writing it down and letting the world read it out loud. If you're still watching and curious how this unfolds, comment number 2 below so I know you haven't blinked. Now let's move on to Chapter 3. They didn't arrive like guests. They arrived like a plan that had been rehearsed without me. 4 vehicles rolled onto the pavers, SUV, sedan, pickup with a cooler strapped like a promise. Another SUV with tinted windows that rebuffed the sun. Doors opened in a staccato of thunks and hinges. The first bodies out moved like they already knew where the shade would be. I noticed shoes left untied, beach towels flung over shoulders, a speaker carried like a crown. The smell that came with them was sunscreen over gas and something sugary, the way vacation always tries to launder itself. Derek came up the walk with his look fixed between apology and entitlement, the hinge he likes to lean on when he imagines leverage. He didn't offer a handshake. He clapped my shoulder as if we were midpoint through a conversation I had never started. Lily followed with a ring light in one hand and a water bottle the size of a fire extinguisher in the other. The others radiated openness, the practiced innocence of people who assume walls exist to hold up their stories. I didn't invite anyone inside. I stood on the threshold because thresholds are where rules declare themselves. I kept my voice at room temperature. "This is not happening," I said. "Turn around. Find a hotel." They smiled with their eyes the way people do in corporate training videos. One of the men I didn't know peeled away and peered into my study as if square footage were a public good. A young woman lifted her phone and panned the lanai, narrating the light as if it had posed for her. In the corner of my mind, a foreman with a clipboard checked the box next to non-compliance and circled it twice. I did not repeat myself. Repetition is a seduction. It invites argument and converts no one. Instead, I stepped sideways, reached for the side gate's keypad, and killed its code, then thumbed the smart panel to lock the interior doors that mattered. They could have the air, they would not have the rooms. Boundaries are not symbols until they touch something useful. Derek's mouth adjusted to a new tactic. He softened his tone and let a little hurt show around the edges. He described this as a long-planned family visit with friends who were practically family. He said the word master the way some people say sanctuary, as if the room held a sacrament and he was its true believer. He invoked Elena without speaking her name, the echo of her kindness doing work on his behalf. The old me would have swallowed hard and tried to make a compromise in the shape of a chair cushion. The new me remembered the HOA log, the lockbox entries, the sound of Ruth's hat through a phone. I stepped back into my study and opened the laptop. If I was going to be the unreasonable man in someone else's narration, I would at least be an exact one. The HOA portal still showed the guest entries. The Lockbox app showed attempts like a Morse code message. 3 tries, 1 unlock. Then a notification popped that didn't belong. "Welcome, Tom. Your new listing is live." A cheerful email from a company I had never used, full of confetti emojis I didn't need to see, to feel. The subject line named my street. The body of the message used my name and voice to describe my villa as a coastal oasis available for a 10-night stretch at a rate that would make my HOA president add a second vein to her forehead. My stomach went cold in the efficient way of steel. I clicked the link and there it was. My dock, my kitchen island, My bedroom photographed at angles that looked like Lily had already been inside with a camera while I slept. The host profile was Tom Alvarez, and the payout account numbers were not mine. This wasn't courtesy fishing for a weekend. This was monetization by impersonation. I took screenshots. I downloaded the listing page as a PDF. I forwarded the email to my attorney's address with a subject line that told her I would be needing a faster Monday. Outside the study, voices rose and fell like surf, someone laughing, someone dragging a cooler, Lily testing her ring light against the shade. I copied the listing link and pasted it into a message to HOA compliance with a short, unambiguous note. Then I called the guardhouse. This is Alvarez at Bayview. Mark every entry from the last hour and stand by for law enforcement. No more guests through my gate. I walked back to the threshold and took one long breath to remind my ribs who was in charge of them. Listen carefully, I said, and kept my tone flat because flat is where facts live. You are not staying here. If you do not leave in the next 5 minutes, I will make a police report for trespass and impersonation. I will not discuss it again. A pair of sunglasses turned toward me as if I had said something eccentric at a brunch. Derek moved closer, his voice pitched for intimacy. He reminded me of promises I had not made. He implied that Elena would have approved of generosity that benefited him. He used the word owe, not to mean debt, but to mean obligation without end. He tried on the face of a reasonable man dealing with an unreasonable elder, a mask that plays well on camera. I didn't rise to it. I looked past him at the driveway, at the line of vehicles that hummed as if they were listening. I pictured the lockbox log, the HOA entries, the listing pulsing on a website like a beacon for the wrong ships. I thought of enforcement as a tide, slow, steady, indifferent to surface drama. Then I turned, entered the study, and dialed 911. The dispatcher sounded exactly like the person you want on the other end of a bad day. I explained in sentences that would read well later. Uninvited arrival, refusal to leave, evidence of a short-term rental listing created without my consent, under my name, for this specific address. The phrase paper trail has always comforted me. You can walk back down it in daylight. By the time I ended the call, the room beyond the threshold had changed flavor. The music dropped a notch, the ring light snapped shut, the voices lost their upward tilt. They could smell authority coming even if they called it by other names. I stood where I had started, on the edge between in and out, a patient man with a neat portfolio and the tide behind him. The bay glittered at my shoulder. Somewhere out there, a dolphin surfaced and took a breath that sounded like agreement. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I waited for the siren and the paperwork that would turn theory into line item. Sometimes you don't win by making a point. Sometimes you win by writing it down and letting the world read it out loud. Sirens don't wail in Naples the way they do up north. They arrive like a decision, steady and unembarrassed, and then they park exactly where they mean to. The patrol car stopped just shy of the pavers, tires at the line where my grasp begins. 2 officers stepped out with the calm you see in people who've heard worse stories and still prefer the simple ones. The older one introduced himself and asked me if I was the homeowner. I handed over my ID, then the deed copy I keep in the portfolio, then the printout of the HOA guest log the guardhouse had emailed in response to my call. There's a comfort in the choreography of credentials. It puts everyone where they belong on the stage. They listened while I described the lockbox entries and the short-term rental listing. The younger officer took notes with quick, square handwriting, each letter boxed like it might someday be evidence. When Derek approached with his diplomacy face on, the older officer lifted a palm and asked him to wait. The gesture was small and respectful, but its meaning propagated through the group like a pressure wave. The speaker slid back into its zipper. A laugh that had begun died of natural causes. When it was his turn, Derek tried out the word misunderstanding and took it for a walk around the block. He said he believed there was an open invitation. He said we were family and that emotions were running high. He framed the visit as a reconciliation that had gotten off on the wrong foot. He almost convinced himself, which is the only audience he's ever really courted. The older officer nodded in the way professionals nod when they are allowing the performance to end before they roll the credits. Then he asked the question that matters. "Sir, do you have the homeowner's permission to be here today?" When Derek reached for an answer that wasn't a yes, the conversation stopped pretending. The officers requested everyone gather their things. They gave a time horizon, 15 minutes to vacate, or trespass charges. A hush spread over the pavers, then the quiet chaos of retreat. Lids snapped shut, towels shaken, a ring light folded like a fragile insect. Lily looked at me with a mixture of injury and calculation, as if deciding which face would play better later. She filmed 3 seconds of the bay instead of the officers and put the phone away with a little sigh that asked to be remembered. Half the group loaded with the hurried grace of practiced exiters. 2 men lingered, narrating indignation to each other in sentences that never arrived at a subject. Derek didn't move. He waited until his audience had dwindled to those who could read the room, then stepped close enough to make the old habits want to yield. He kept his voice low. He described an opportunity he'd been cultivating, a booking that would have covered everybody's costs if only I'd cooperated. He said I'd ruined the timing, as if scams kept Wall Street hours. He leaned on the future tense like a bad beam. "You'll regret this," he said, not as a threat, but as if time itself would put an arm around his shoulder. I left the threat where it lay. The officers walked the last of them out to the cars and waited until engines turned over. The older one gave me a card with a case number and instructions that sounded like common sense stapled to authority. "Call if anyone returns. Keep your documentation. Don't engage on social media." His mouth flickered at that last part, an expression I translated as "I've seen our century, and I don't love it." I thanked him. Gratitude has a ballast to it when you mean it. Silence is not the same after noise departs. It hangs like a sheet you haven't finished tucking. I stood on the lanai and let the house remind me which part of it was mine. The pavers wore a rash of damp footprints, the stray confetti of a life that had tried to happen here and failed to take root. I washed down the stone. The water ran clean and then cleaner, and my breathing matched it, a hose laying dust back into the earth. Inside, the study screens waited like patient animals. I filed the incident number with the HOA, attached the screenshots of the listing, and sent the lot to Marta with a subject line that would catch her eye. Then I made a list of small repairs that had nothing to do with trespass. A sticky drawer in the kitchen, the outdoor GFC awani that had tripped last storm, a nick in the dock rail where a previous owner must have cut bait. Men like me survive on lists. When a big thing tries to swallow your day, you hand it small things until it chokes. Near dusk, the phone began its next act. Texts from unknown numbers asked leading questions. A post appeared online casting me as the man who forgot his heart in a safe deposit box. Photographs from my own view were used to decorate a narrative where I was miserly at scale. It was a preview of a storm that prefers Wi-Fi to wind. I stayed off the platforms because arguments conducted in public are rarely about truth. They are about applause. I saved what I needed to save, dated what needed dating, and closed the laptop. On the dock, the water had that evening heft that makes the pilings look taller. I sat and let my feet dangle above the minnows. The bay breathed in its unhurried way. Over on the far side, a shrimp boat's mast pricked the sky and held it in place. The house behind me steadied, boards warming, glass dimming, locks clicking their soft syllables. I did not feel triumphant. I felt accurate. The difference matters. Accuracy keeps a man in his chair when theater would have him storm a stage. Before bed, I changed the lockbox code again and deleted the app that made it too easy to share. I wrote "physical keys only" on a sticky note and pressed it inside the portfolio where decisions live. I set the alarm with the same hand that once set rebar schedules and crane lifts. A boundary it held. The boundary would need to hold again. People who lean once tend to lean twice, especially if the first push taught them anything useful. In the mirror, my face looked like a map that knew where the rivers were. I turned off the light and let the dark lay down the rest of the day. Tomorrow would ask for different tools. I would lay them out in the morning. If you're still watching and can't believe what just happened, comment number 4 below to stay with me. Now let's move on to Chapter 5. Morning found me seated at the kitchen island with the portfolio open like a first aid kit. The bay wore a slick, blameless blue, the sort of day people paste to brochures when they want to lie about ease. On the tablet, the first wave hit, a post framed as elegy staged in a parked SUV with soft lighting and a practiced tremor in the voice. In it, I was the cold patriarch who called police on family, a man who traded a daughter's memory for square footage. Screenshots multiplied as if the internet were seeding clouds to manufacture weather. Comments arrived in little volleys, each one sure of its angle, each one adding story where facts would have done. I did not answer in anger. I collected. I saved the video, noted the timestamp, captured the caption before edits could make it cleaner. I mapped the spread the way I used to trace seepage through a levee, where it began, where it bulged, where it found weak soil. My name was a currency in rooms I had never entered. It bought indignation wholesale. The old instinct was to knock on each door and correct the record by hand. The new instinct, the one Florida had been teaching me, said storms aren't persuaded. They're endured with preparation. Then came the email, trimmed with confetti and confidence. "Congratulations, Tom, your listing is live." The link opened to my dock in my bedroom dressed in the same light the pelicans use, photographed by someone who knew where the house caught glow. The host name was mine, the payout not. The calendar was blocked in 10-night bricks, clear as fence posts. I took more screenshots. I downloaded the whole page into the neat coffin of a PDF, that magic by which the mutable becomes testimony. There was a second attachment, a gift letter. The subject line claimed it had been signed when Elena was alive, a blessing on future transfer. The language was boilerplate with perfume on it, gratitude, family, continuity. The signature sat on the line like birds pretending to be still. I enlarged them until the pixels broke their disguise. The metadata wore its mistake like a lapel pin, created after my daughter's funeral, time-stamped by a cheap e-sign vendor, witnessed by an email that rhymed with the alias used on the rental platform. I felt something inside me click into a climate I recognized. It was not rage, it was alignment. Somewhere a load had been miscalculated. Somewhere a beam was about to declare the truth of its limits. I wrote to Marta with the economy of a bridge tender mid-squall. Subject line, bullet points, attachments. Then I stood and walked the perimeter of the house the way foremen walk forms before a pour. Locks tested, ring angles checked. The lanai door eased and latched. Each little confirmation returned a square inch of breath. On the bay, a man in a center console threw a cast net and hauled it in silver. I watched him fold and throw again, the tidy loop, the clean arc, the gathered glint. A good cast looks like it was inevitable. I wanted that look. Instead of answering Derek's story with a louder story, I would give the court a net full of unshiny fish, logs, links, meta, a video of my threshold becoming a job site. The second wave hit by noon. Friends of friends reshared the elegy with captions that made me recognizable to their particular grievances. An old colleague messaged a sentence that tried to hold both sides and ended up holding none. A neighbor 3 doors down sent a text that said simply, "Head up." Ruth appeared in the doorway wearing her hat and the expression of someone who has decided wind is not a reason to cancel a walk. She set a thumb drive on the island without comment, the way you pass salt at supper. "You might want this," she said. "The kid flew his toy drone last night. Good audio." I asked her to sit. She declined out of habit. "You'll do fine," she said. "You're built for weather." It was the sort of line that sounds like kindness until you realize it's a measurement. She had taken my dimensions and found them adequate to the load. The thumb drive held a little window into my driveway from 20 feet up. The square geometry of pavers, the orderly curve of the grass, the spill of bodies and coolers. And then his voice, plain, unhurried, instructional. He read the code. He called the house ours for 3 weeks. He laughed in the way men laugh when they believe something has been secured beyond challenge. The audio didn't shout, it documented. I sat with the headphones on and let my pulse argue itself back to normal. By late afternoon, I had my picture the way I wanted it. A timeline hard enough to put weight on, a map of trespass that began at a keypad and ended at a listing, a forged blessing bracketed by the date of a funeral, a chorus of posts tuned to a key that photographs love. I did not post the picture. I preserved it. I printed a 1-page index to keep my head honest in a hearing. I called the guardhouse to thank them for the earlier record. I wrote the incident number on the inside of the portfolio and underlined it once. At sunset, the bay dropped its glitter and kept only the muscle. The water darkened to that surgical blue that makes pilings look ceremonial. The house settled around me, a structure of joints and chosen limits. I thought of Elena and the way she negotiated without erasing herself. I thought of how generosity is only moral when it isn't stolen. Somewhere in town, Derek was teaching his own audience how to clap on cue. Tomorrow, I told the glass, would be paperwork. Paperwork and a judge. Let the storm perform for whomever it wished. I had cast my net, the rest was retrieval. If you're still watching and wondering what choice I made, comment number 5 below to tell me you're invested. Now let's move on to Chapter 7. Marta met me on the phone like a metronome, steady ticks, clean bars. She didn't waste oxygen admiring the mess. She asked questions in the order a court would recognize: possession, access, impersonation, publication. I read her the index. She interrupted only to calibrate. "You have the listing captured with timestamps?" "Yes." "You can tie the e-sign witness to the rental alias?" "Yes." "Do we have third-party corroboration on physical access?" "Yes, the HOA log and a neighbor's drone." She laid out the fork without embroidery. Option 1. I try to resolve within the family, a phrase that sounds warm until you notice its draft. That would mean asking a man who counterfeited my name to keep my privacy like a keepsake. It would mean telling the HOA to look away from a listing created expressly to break their rules. Option 2, we go to court for a temporary injunction. We notify the platform and the bank. We put the forged letter in a light it cannot survive, and we make clear that future violations will be measured in fines, not feelings. The first path promised quiet, but only the sort microphones give. The second promised noise now and quiet later. "I pick later," I said. The line went silent for half a breath, which in lawyer time is the space for a nod. She dictated the shape of the morning. I would file a sworn affidavit with the attachments as exhibits. She would draft the emergency motion and the proposed order. I would deliver physical copies to the clerk because electrons still sometimes vanish when truth is inconvenient. We would ask the judge for 3 things: stop the impersonation, stop the listing, stop the entry. Alongside it, she would send a preservation letter to the platform and a fraud alert to the bank. If Derek wanted to argue gifts in a way that made a mockery of grief, he could do so with a calendar on the wall and a court reporter in the room. Before dawn, the portfolio wore a new layer of order. Affidavits signed and notarized. Screenshots printed with URLs visible like tag numbers on the ears of cattle. Log excerpts with the guardhouse's time zone annotated so some future quibble couldn't pretend the sun rose twice in one day. The USB from Ruth cloned and labeled. I put the ring light clip next to the drone angle because the contrast told a better truth than either alone. Performance versus instruction. Light versus voice. At the courthouse, the clerk took our bundle with the same expression I've seen on site inspectors with a long punch list, a look that appreciates neatness because sloppiness is how days go long. The docket clerk stamped the time mechanically and promised a hearing within 72 hours. On the sidewalk outside, the heat had already begun its climb. Ruth's words returned not as comfort but as calculus. Built for weather. It meant material, thickness, fixity. Back home, I made 2 calls. The first to HOA compliance to alert them in writing that any short-term rental listing at my address was counterfeit, that legal action was in motion, and that I welcomed their own enforcement if they wished to play their instrument alongside mine. The second to the guardhouse to update access. No guests admitted without a call from the landline and a code that changed like tides. It felt like sandbagging before a surge. You didn't do it because you liked the look. You did it because sleep later is worth sweat now. By afternoon, the other path made its pitch. A voicemail from Lily, long on tremor and short on nouns, asking for a private conversation, just the 2 of us. A text from Derek that began the way a man apologizes to a camera crew and ended the way he bargains with a night clerk. "We can make this go away," he wrote, "if you'll keep the lawyers out of it." I archived both into the same folder where I keep pictures of sink leaks before repair, proof of condition. Marta called with an update that sounded like a weather report the captain trusts. The platform had responded to the preservation letter, freezing the listing pending verification of identity. The bank had flagged the payout account and would produce the opening documents if served. The court had assigned a judge known more for punctuality than poetry. She would send me the hearing time when it posted. "Get some rest," she said, and the sentence worked on me like a signed permit. Evening, and the bay composed its durable blue again. I moved through the house in a loop, not as a nervous man, but as someone reacquainting himself with deliberate use. The lanai slider answered my hand with the soft oath of a door that fits. The study chair accepted my weight like an old friend. On the desk, the portfolio lay shut, latched like a suitcase before a good trip. I poured water instead of whiskey because I wanted a steady night and a clear morning. In the glass, the room appeared twice, once upright, once inverted. Both belonged to me. Before sleep, I scrolled once through the storm, a sampling of the posts, the comment gutters, the places where my name had been traded for clicks. It looked smaller now, a squall line losing discipline as it moved inland. I shut the phone, drew the curtains, and let the room become a room again instead of a screen. I had chosen the loud road toward quiet. Tomorrow would bring a bench, a number, the polite brutality of law. I am not a man who goes looking for fights, but I do understand load paths, and I know what happens when you let a bad beam stay in the wall. You don't nurse it, you pull it. Then you set the good timber and listen, for once, to the sound of a house that knows who runs it. If you're still watching and realize how powerful evidence can be, comment number 6 below to keep following. Now let's move on to Chapter 9. The morning after the filing felt like the backside of a storm. The light too clean, the air scrubbed thin, the neighborhood pretending it hadn't watched a spectacle. My phone stacked notifications into a kind of chorus that mistook repetition for truth. The earlier elegies had spawned their own offspring, screenshots cropped to flatter a grievance, captions tuned to the register that travels fastest. Hurt, then outrage, then rumor stated as revelation. I did what I had trained myself to do across a working life that punished impulse. I dated, saved, labeled. The portfolio grew heavier not with anger, but with sequence, that slow geometry by which a story acquires weight. The HOA's message arrived with the briskness of a memo written by someone who has typed the same sentence too many times. The board reminded me of the ban on short-term rentals, cited fines that escalate like stairs, and asked me to confirm whether the listing in my name was authentic. I replied with the case number, the preservation letters, the motion before the court, and the clear statement that the listing was counterfeit. Their second note was cooler in temperature and warmer in solidarity. They would open their own enforcement track, document gate activity with unusual care, notify security to treat my address as a site requiring supervisor attention. It was the dry comfort of procedure marching in step beside mine. By noon, Marta forwarded a copy of a bank email triggered by her fraud alert. There had been an attempt to open a small line of credit with my name, propped up by a power of attorney I had never executed. The bank had frozen the application at the sight of signatures too eager to be believed. The PDF they attached wore the same e-sign vendor, different clothes, the witness email a cousin to the alias on the rental platform. I printed the notice, highlighted the sections that told on themselves, and slid the new exhibit into the growing file. Impersonation was not a tactic so much as a habit. Habits scale until they meet a wall. Ruth knocked without ceremony and stepped just inside the shade of the lanai, hands empty, hat brim configured for business. Her voice carried the dryness of someone who has seen too many summer squalls to applaud lightning. Her grandson had cleaned up the drone audio at his bedroom desk with freeware and an attention span, and she wanted me to hear the parts the phone mic had let fall through the net. On the track, the driveway sounded like an index of small intentions: shoes, plastic buckles, the whisper of beach towels, and then the clean syllables of a keypad, the brief pause of calculation, and the exact sentence a judge would understand. Use this and act like it's ours for 3 weeks. A laugh followed, low and unworried. The boy had pulled the murmur forward until it sat under the words like rebar under a pour. I copied the file, made 2 backups, and labeled the USB with a pen that leaves indelible letters. That evening, Lily sent a long voice memo lined with trimmer and careful pauses. The words asked for a private conversation, just us, off the record, and suggested that a public apology from me would depressurize the situation. I saved the file and wrote a note for myself I would be able to read when the heat climbed. Negotiating in the shadows is how daylight gets stolen. Derek confined himself to a single sentence that could be read as warning or prediction depending on how much you wanted to scare yourself. I moved it into the folder where I keep photographs of hairline cracks circled in pencil, the kind you watch because they are trying to decide what they want to be. Sleep came like a permit stamped late in the day, not because the work had finished, but because the sequence had been honored. In the dark, the house returned to itself with audible relief. Compressor, ice maker, the soft arithmetic of locks answering their cues. I lay there and let the ledger of the last week assemble into columns. On one side, theater, ring lights, choreographed sorrow, captions engineered to travel. On the other, evidence, logs, metadata, a neighbor's camera angling down through ordinary air. Between them, a modest man who prefers bolts set to spec and sentences written in the voice a clerk can accept. The balance was not yet even, but the math was beginning to show. The next day had the taste of paper. Marta called with a time for the hearing early enough to keep the docket honest. I laid out the exhibits in the order that made sense even if the power went out: entry, access, impersonation, publication, attempted credit line, the soft, undeniable sentence brought down from a sky full of summer heat. I placed Ruth's name on the witness list with a note about her habit of seeing what others glide past. The bay beyond the glass performed its own routine, tide leaving, tide returning, while I rehearsed answers to questions organized by statute number. I felt neither heroic nor persecuted. I felt like a man doing the work required to inhabit his own name. That night, the weather turned damp enough to lay a shine on the pavers. In the reflection, the palm fronds moved like slow handwriting. I took a final walk through the rooms, not to check the predictable, but to remind the house I understood who we were to each other. Doors, latches, drawers, the quiet, domestic grammar of a life that had earned its nouns. In the study, the portfolio clicked shut with a sound I have always trusted. At the dock, a mullet jumped once and landed with a slap frank enough to be instruction. Boundaries are decisions that persist. Tomorrow, the judge would ask for facts, and I would carry them across the threshold like tools. Courthouses flatten personalities. They make swagger look theatrical and restraint look like competence. The hearing room was bright by design and indifferent by practice. I sat where clients sit, hands on the portfolio as if it were ballast, and watched the judge arrange her pens in a neat row that probably told me everything I needed to know about how the next hour would go. Marta opened with the economy of a tied table, time, place, sequence, then began to lay out exhibits like stepping stones that would carry a careful mind without getting its shoes wet. She started with the unglamorous, the HOA gate log with my address stamped over arrivals, the lockbox access entries showing the rhythm of attempts and the single success. The security footage frame grabs that fix bodies to rectangles and take the theater away. She moved to the counterfeit listing and the companion emails, each timed, each captured, each wearing the platform's headers like signatures you can't forge. When she reached the gift letter, she did not raise her voice. She pulled the metadata into the light as if unrolling a clean blueprint. Creation after the funeral, witness tied to the rental alias, form language copied carelessly enough to preserve its tells. The judge's questions were brief and organized, testing load paths rather than motives. Who had the right of possession on the relevant dates? What access had been granted in writing? Where did the money go when the listing booked? Did any document exist that transferred control? Each no landed with the soft thump of a sack of sand, the useful kind that keeps basements dry. Marta played the cleaned audio last, not for drama, but because sequence matters. A voice saying, "Act like it's ours," means more when a record has already shown how. The judge listened without spectacle, then asked for a repeat between the syllables that count. The room felt the way pilings feel when the tide stalls, ready to declare what they already know. Derek's lawyer called it a misunderstanding lined with grief, wrapped in that gauzy phrase, family arrangement. He tried to turn the forged letter into memorial intent and the listing into premature enthusiasm. He spoke of privacy and invited lenience the way a man might invite a neighbor to a barbecue he has not asked permission to host. The judge did not scold. She returned to possession, access, impersonation, publication, and the bank's frozen application for a line of credit under a power of attorney birthed in the dark. When counsel tried to step around the dates, she set them back in order like plates on a shelf. The injunction issued in language that would never trend online and will outlast every caption written about it. No entry without written permission, no listing in my name or at my address, no use of any likeness or document claiming transfer of control. Preservation orders to the platform and the bank. Notice to the HOA that enforcement from their side would not conflict with the courts. A hearing date for anything further, and a reminder that compliance is not a debate. The gavel did not bother to punctuate. The order had already done it. Outside, the heat came off the sidewalk in manageable waves. I thanked Marta in the tone engineers reserve for crew who keep a bridge upright in a crosswind. Back at the villa, I posted a single sentence to the places where people had been busy on my behalf without a briefing. It said that a court had entered a temporary injunction, that impersonation and entry had been halted, and that any future matters would be handled within the law. No victory lap, no sermon, no link. The note found its level and stayed there. Neighbors materialized in the way neighborhoods do when decision replaces chatter. A retired boat captain clapped my shoulder with a hand built for ropes and told me I'd done the right thing in the only language he trusts. Declarative sentences. The HOA compliance chair called to say the board was grateful for the court's clarity and would nail their notices precisely. The guardhouse supervisor promised a dull gate and meant it. In the inbox, a handful of earlier critics sent messages that sounded like weather changing. Fewer adjectives, more nouns. By dusk, the bay had resumed its proof that continuity is not the same as stasis. The water wore the day's color and offered the night a margin to write in. I put the court order in a clear sleeve at the front of the portfolio and added a sticky tab with the date printed in my blockiest hand. The house registered the quiet and replied in kind. Compressor cycling, glass accepting its tint, hinges obeying physics rather than drama. I slept hard enough to learn that a good remedy is not loud, it is exact. Settlements do not feel like triumphs, they feel like architecture. Loads measured, spans accepted, the inevitable compromise between beauty and budget. 2 months after the injunction, we sat at the long walnut conference table in a room with a view that pretended trees mattered to law. Derek looked smaller than his online narratives had drawn him. Sunglasses off, angles sharper, a posture trying to remember how to be ordinary. His counsel did most of the speaking because sentences were cheaper when professionals wore them. The terms were less theatrical than the week leading to them. He would reimburse legal costs already incurred, acknowledge publicly that earlier posts contained inaccuracies and omissions, commit to no further disparagement, and agree to a permanent prohibition against entry, impersonation, and any use of my property's image in commerce. A restitution clause tied to any future violation hung over the page like a truss. Breach, and penalties double with automatic referral to the state attorney for the forged documents. I asked no damages for the sake of pain or insult. I asked for guardrails. Marta read the language clause by clause as if laying bolts at even intervals and tapping each with a wrench. He signed with the hand of a man who recognizes a structure that will outlast his appetite. I added my name where the paper requested it and looked not at him but at the date. In all my years, dates have saved me from sentiment more efficiently than speeches. The judge entered the agreement as an order with the workmanlike cadence of someone who has put more roofs back on than she has admired. The clerk stamped copies. We stood. No one embraced. The elevator left us at the lobby without opinion. Back at the villa, I did work that shows and work that doesn't. The lockbox came off the post and went into a drawer where old keys and forgotten screws talk about usefulness. The smart locks stayed, but their codes narrowed to the smallest circle. Me, the electrician, the pool technician whose invoices read like haiku. I scheduled a security vendor to disable every remote permission that had felt like convenience before convenience revealed its cost. Physical keys returned to their old dignity, heavy in the pocket, incapable of forwarding. I wrote a short note to the HOA with the order attached. The compliance chair replied with a paragraph that sounded almost cheerful. A board can forgive a lot if a resident meets them where their bylaws live. I called the guardhouse to say thank you and meant it. Men in booths keep small towns from becoming cartoons. I brought Ruth a bag of limes and a thank you baked into the narrative she prefers. A story about a boy and a drone and a summer that will look better to him when he's 40. David, the son of an old friend, called out of sincere curiosity rather than obligation. His voice has the good weight of a man who works with his hands and thinks with the part of the brain that copies measurements twice. He asked to come down for a weekend of fishing and quiet. I told him I would make the guest room ready on purpose rather than in panic. The difference between invited and assumed, I have learned, is not courtesy, it is category. The house seemed to nod when I said it, the way houses agree when you relearn a rule they have been trying to teach you. Evenings resumed their modest rituals. I turned on the amber path lights and sat where air conditioning meets dusk in a handshake. Boats came home with that end-of-day patience only water teaches. The dock accepted the weight of my steps like we'd been practicing. Inside, the portfolio slid back onto its shelf, not as a threat, but as a tool returned, ready if needed. I noticed the way the refrigerator door sealed with a tiny hush, the way the lanai slider caught exactly where I wanted it, the way the master bedroom held its view without auditioning for anyone's lens. None of it felt like victory. All of it felt like repair. For the first time in weeks, I let myself imagine a morning that did not begin with saving someone else's sentences. Coffee, tide charts, the good ache of shoulders in a pool, papaya seedlings encouraged by weather they could trust. I have no illusions about permanence. Concrete cracks, pilings rot. People forget what they've learned, but a structure with the right bracing earns its calm day by day. The villa was no longer a stage, it was what it wanted to be when I signed the papers, a house that knew who ran it. Reflection is a luxury you earn by surviving your own softness. I had told myself for years that kindness was a warm blanket you could throw over any problem until it sat still. That worked until kindness became a costume other people slipped into when they wanted access. What this season taught me isn't complicated in vocabulary, only in practice. Generosity without boundaries is irrigation without channels. It makes a swamp where you were promised a garden. I used to think paperwork was the enemy of feeling. Now I know it is the friend of truth. Affidavits, logs, metadata, the dry recital of numbers and timestamps, these are boring until the day arrives when boredom is another word for proof. When someone says a house is a feeling, they are half right. The other half is signatures, keys, a docket number that proves you exist where your name says you do. In my 20s, I loved concrete because it remembered shapes. In my 60s, I respect documents because they remember terms. Age is not a shield. It is a ledger. You either learn to enter your days honestly or watch the math betray you later. The culture loves to organize people like me into types: the stubborn patriarch, the miser who chose walls over people, the relic clinging to a deed like a talisman. The truth is quieter. I wanted a life that would not make a liar out of my work. I built things designed to hold. When the time came to hold my own line, I discovered that decency needs enforcement the way seawalls need rebar. Good intentions buckle where law keeps its posture. I am not uninterested in forgiveness. I simply refuse to confuse it with amnesia. A settlement is not a reconciliation. It is a map for the only travel two parties can manage. If the young think that sounds cold, they should stand on a bridge during a storm and watch the way a span will hum under load. Not because it is angry, but because it is doing what it was built to do. Mercy belongs in the column marked choice. Compliance belongs in the one marked must. There is a small joy in the domestic specifics that returned once the theater packed up its lights. I make lists and cross them off. GFCI replaced, hose bib tightened, gate code confirmed. I wrap leftovers and label them, not because food needs surnames, but because names prevent confusion. I return calls the day I mean to. I sometimes sit with Elena's photograph and tell her what she already knows about me, that I take comfort in precision and refuge in routine, that I will continue to help where help is not a password, that I will mistake patience for surrender less often now. If I had advice for men built like me, it would not be poetic. Label what is yours and protect it without apology. Invite people and mean it, and let the invitation end on the day it names. When someone performs sorrow for a lens, offer them a chair and a glass of water, not your keys. Know your bylaws, your neighbors, your gate guard's name. When noise comes, save the file. When decision comes, let it be written down. I do not hate Derek. Hate is a hobby, and I am not in the market for new ones. I hope he learns what money cannot teach, what applause cannot sustain, what shortcuts cannot deliver. I hope Lily discovers a light she doesn't have to borrow from a window she does not own. None of that is up to me. What is up to me fits on a single page: habit, boundary, remedy, quiet. Most evenings, the bay gives a small show to anyone still awake to watch. Boats tick home in singles and pairs. A pelican makes a tidy incision in the water. The sky changes clothes without vanity. I sit where I can hear the house breathe, not because houses have lungs, but because a structure at ease makes a sound you only notice when you have earned it. Peace turns out not to be the absence of conflict. It is the presence of finished work. In the end, peace wasn't a gift or a stroke of luck. It was a craft, slow, deliberate, and built on boundaries that held when pushed. Generosity mattered, but only with channels. Otherwise, it flooded the whole field. Truth mattered, but only when written down. Otherwise, it evaporated under the heat of opinion. And dignity mattered most when it was quiet. The steady click of a lock used correctly, the calm of a home that no longer auditions for anyone, the small rituals that say, "This is enough." The lesson is simple and not easy. Kindness without structure becomes permission. Love without clarity becomes leverage. Silence without purpose becomes surrender. We protect what we cherish by naming it, documenting it, and inviting others into it on purpose, not by accident, not by pressure, not by performance. Law is not the enemy of grace. It is the scaffolding that lets grace stand in bad weather. Boundaries aren't walls against the world. They are promises to the self, so that what is shared can stay generous and what is private can stay whole. Winning, when it finally comes, rarely looks like triumph. It looks like a room returned to order, a key kept, a night's sleep unbroken. If any part of this journey resonated with you, if it reminded you to tighten a boundary, to put something in writing, or to choose the long road toward quiet, add your voice. Share your reflections in the comments. Tell us which line stayed with you or what moment shifted your perspective. And if you'd like more stories about resilience, hard-won peace, and the everyday courage of doing the right thing, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. Your presence here keeps this community honest, thoughtful, and brave. Thank you for watching and for helping us build a space where stories don't just pass the time, they strengthen it.